Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Meghan Craig. I just call you Meg Craig. I know that's what everyone else does, so I'm used to it. But Meghan, you join us once again. You, of course, work with Baptist Student Missions in Texas, and you've been fully funded for a number of years now. And as recorded on the other podcast, you have been a change agent within your organization. But Meghan, first of all, welcome back.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, glad to have you. And we had discussed maybe doing a second podcast together here and really kind of digging into how do you handle that, and it's hard to even put our finger on exactly, of being the change agent within your organization and yet also realizing that you have a job.
Yes.
This might not be a part of your job.
Yes.
But you're realizing that the support raising issue is a issue that's affecting the entire organization because people are coming to you about it, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's share with each other a couple of stories first. How we found ourselves in similar positions at one point or another. As we were talking before, I'll just mention to you, many years ago, I had somebody pull me aside at a national meeting. It was somebody who was in a similar ministry as mine, and he kind of whispered and was like, "Hey, are you fully funded or something?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "How did you do that?" I was like, "Oh, that was cool." I was happy to talk to him. And I think he was from Texas.
Okay.
And then I had the exact same conversation not 10 minutes later with a guy from California. Yeah. And again, it was kind of pulled me off to the side. It was kind of a whispering thing. And then the guy from Wisconsin. And then the guy from Indiana. And then the guy from... Yeah, and I was like, what? This isn't my role here. Why is everybody... And so it put me in a place of... I was in the room for different purposes.
Right.
And suddenly, I began to realize God me had in the room for those conversations.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about my story.
Yeah.
Tell me about yours, because I'm sure yours is probably somewhat similar.
So everyone would ask me that was raising support, why do you like this so much? And I had friends that were like dragging their feet. They didn't enjoy support raising. They saw it as like a necessary evil.
Ooh.
And so by
the way, we have a podcast on that.
Yes.
Everyone needs to go back and listen to that podcast. It is not a necessary evil. Don't use those words. But anyway, I digress. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. And so it's not a necessary evil. As a matter of fact, it is incredibly biblical. You can look at Nehemiah. You can look at the Levites in the Old Testament and see how they lived on support and how Nehemiah asked the king to support him as he went to help rebuild the wall. And people began to ask me, well, why do you enjoy this? And I began to share with them about the biblical basis and about how much my partners were a part of my ministry. They weren't just something that I did on the side. And I saw them as necessary because I needed people to pray for me and what I was doing on the college campus. And I needed people to join me in the work I was doing there.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Aaron, how did you begin to change the organization that you were in and what you did?
Yeah, so it was an interesting situation because I wasn't full-time with that organization. They were kind of a ministry partner. And yet, here I was being confronted regularly with this thing that wasn't in my scope. And so what I had to learn was the safest thing for me to do was just to simply start asking questions.
Okay.
And that would not be too intimidating. That wouldn't force people into feeling like I was like calling them on the carpet. And so I would just ask questions what are appropriate and just start saying, "Hey, how are you guys doing with this? How are you doing, with that?" And it was actually in the process of that, Meg, that people started asking me more questions. And people started asking me about policy and enforcement and all these really heavy questions, right?
Yes.
And so it put me in a weird spot where at one point the president actually sat me down and said, "Hey, this is one of those such a time as this moments where we want you to do this other thing that we were wanting to partner with you, but can you also kind of lead our support raising? Can you help us like overhaul this?
Wow, yeah.
And so it was both honoring, but also he didn't understand the size of the ask that he was putting in front of me. And so, yeah, that was it. Like, it was great, but also I would be lying if I didn't say I was confused of going, seeing the problem is different from really clearly knowing how to fix the problem. I kind of expected him to know how to do it, right? So I think that was a little bit of my story of kind of how I started, I guess moving into more of an organization policy setting posture. But really, my heart was, I just love the guys and gals that kept asking me for help.
Right.
It's just like, I love these people.
Yeah.
It kind of breaks my heart that they're hurting. And in fact, one guy, I watched his marriage dissolve.
Yeah.
And that just killed me. And obviously there had more to do with it than finances. But I know at one point a statement was made where one spouse said to the other spouse, I can't even trust you to go raise your support and take care of this family. I'm not going to trust you to take care of us emotionally or in other ways either.
Wow, yeah.
And again, that was part of a larger problem. But I was just like, holy cow. Like, the spouse just used the lack of support raising as part of grounds for divorce. Are you kidding me?
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, so that really messed, in a good way, but a hard way, that messed with me.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't, to me, I wasn't like trying to organizationally climb a ladder.
Right,
It was really more of this is a fundamental core need of people that I believe in, that are doing fantastic, great commission work. And they're not just kind of asking me for help. They're asking me for help. How do I engage?
Right.
So I think our stories are probably similar in that way of it was keeping me up at night.
Yes, exactly. I remember a moment where I said to myself, are we not going to send people to college campuses in Texas because we don't have money to do that as a whole organization?
Right.
And that can't be possible.
Right.
There are campuses that need to hear about Christ, and we have to send workers there. And if there are people that are willing to raise their support to do that, we have to equip them to do that. And that really became my driving passion for this, because I am passionate about college students. That is my full-time job, is I work with college students, discipling them, equipping them to share the gospel.
Even still, to this day.
Yes, that's currently what I do.
Right.
Yes, and I want people to be able to launch into their ministry fully funded and seeing their ministry partners as a part of their ministry, not something that they have to have.
Right.
And so that was what drove me to begin this process of helping our culture shift.
And so I had a conversation recently on a similar topic, and I'm going to borrow the analogy from that, where the idea is, I'm going to use this for your organization.
Okay.
So you love college kids for the sake of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
You believe in BSM. You love working with them.
Yes.
They're wanting to get workers, in the door, sort of in the house,
yes,
to help reach more college kids.
Yes.
You wanted to stop them from jumping out the back window.
Yes.
And quitting and never even getting to the campus, or getting there and having to leave because their funding issue wasn't in place.
Yes.
So I think there's probably some people listening to this that have found themselves or currently find themselves in a similar situation where they say, I really do love my ministry and I really love the people that are part of it, but also we're broken.
Yeah.
And so you found yourself there. I've found myself there. And yet, meanwhile, there's other things I wanted to do. Like, you wanted to do campus ministry. There's other stuff I wanted to do. So how did you, like, when you got to that point, Meg, where it was like hey, by the way, here's this whole other full-time job that we'd like for you to do. Oh, but yeah, you can still do your main full-time job.
Yeah. And
they were, in reality, probably two different full-time jobs.
Yes.
And you're pretty awesome, but I got to tell you, I don't see the omnipresence thing coming off you.
No.
So how did you wrestle through that?
Yeah, so I still wrestle with this. So please don't hear I have it all together and I figured it out and I work it well.
Okay.
I think that one of the ways that I did that was I carved out some time in my week where I worked on MPD for our state BSM as an organization. And I only did, for a while, it was a good chunk of my time.
Okay.
And my director was willing to give me the time to do that. And so some other...
That's an important note.
Yes.
You did it with permission. You did it, and it was considered work. It wasn't just out of your free time, so to speak. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
And
by the way, that's important also because otherwise you're going to burn out.
Yes.
If it's not considered work, you're going to burn out. Support raising is always work.
Yes,
Okay.
and that's exactly right. And I was worried that my ministry would suffer, and there were times when it did.
Okay.
And so if I'm being honest, there were times when I focused a lot on support raising for our state and our organization and helping our culture with that. And my girls that I meet with in discipleship suffered for that. But then there were also a lot of times where I saw God work in their lives because they saw what I was doing and how passionate I was about it.
Yeah.
And they were like, we're going to support you like when we graduate.
Right.
And so
your discipleship with them was a little differently than what you'd planned, and yet God was still using it and using you because he called you into doing that. You were being faithful. You weren't doing all the things you wanted to do per se. In fact, you went so far as to say that they suffered a little bit.
Yeah.
I wonder how much that's true or not. I'm not gonna dig in on that. But I would argue that Jesus was definitely using that. He didn't need you in the way that you wanted to be needed, but he was definitely using you and using it to impact them.
Yeah, for sure. And then there came a point where I was considered for the position to come in as our MPD coach.
Okay.
And I got a phone call from our state director, and I was actually working at one of the campuses that I had planted a ministry on when he called me, and he asked me, hey, we would love for you to do this, but we don't want you to feel like you have to leave the campus. Here's my recommendation.
Right.
And I was standing in the hallway with these students that I loved, and I was like, I can't leave the campus. This is where I'm called.
Yeah.
And this is the work I'm called to.
Awesome.
But I want to help.
Yeah.
So we'll figure this out.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so from there, I basically, when we hired Ryan, who is our current MPD coach and director, he and I spent some time together deciding what my role would be. Okay. To maintain, because I had worked really hard, and there was part of me that didn't want to release this baby that I had started to him, but we spent a lot of time discussing what my role would be and how we were going to work it into my schedule. And so now I help with ideas and creativity of things that I see we need to have, because I'm hearing from my peers what we need.
You always got that ear on the ground, so to speak.
Exactly. And then I communicate it with Ryan, and we talk about a way to work it out.
That's awesome.
And then Ryan and I both do Support Raising Solutions, our private boot camp with our organization. So I spend some time prepping for that with him. We do that once a year right now. Okay.
And just to clarify that real quick again, so that means that Meghan, you help facilitate the support raising training in your organization. You're not as active with working on ongoing policy changes and HR stuff, or even coaching, although I know you do that to a certain degree. Yes. But for the most part, you're still a campus ministry worker. You still have a voice and a role that's important within BSM when it comes to the support raising thing. But there are a myriad of organizational details that you don't have to carry.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, cool. If you're enjoying these podcasts and they're hitting on topics that you love, consider following Support Raising Solutions on social media for everyday biblical and practical support raising advice as you're in the process of raising your support. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/supportraisingsolutions and on Twitter at supportraising.
Yeah.
Well, my story is similar, and I'm not going to get into all the nuances of it, but the reality of what happened for me was, as I was being approached from a lot of people from different organizations, that we had a kind of a challenge in that I was kind of asked to do 2 different full-time jobs.
Yeah.
And I had to say no to a couple of things, and I had to say yes to other things. And ultimately it actually led to some change. One of those things was I found myself in Steve Shadrack's office, and I just said, "Hey, I got to ask you some questions. I don't know anybody else that would answer, that even know the answers to these."
Right.
And this is going back several years ago, before I was training the SRS boot camps, and it was in all that at one point that Steve said, "You actually understand this better than you think you do." And I was like, "No, I really don't."
Right.
And he's like, "Well, yeah, you really do." And in some ways, it led to some really healthy changes with that organization that I was working with. But also, and they're wonderful people, and I'm intentionally not saying their name because I don't want to disparage them in any way, shape, or form, because they're fantastic. But there was also some unwillingness to move on some things that I saw as critical.
Yeah.
And it kind of led me to a point of going, man, like and love and have respect, but also I'm not content to sit back and let people just kind of do it the way they want to do it for however long they want to do it, and just let them sit in kind of where they were, calling themselves moving forward. But I mean, I can see the numbers. They weren't moving forward. And it was just kind of a hard time. So in reality, what that led to ultimately is there was a period there where I stepped away from continuing to eat the very people that kind of brought me to working with Steve Shadrack. I was trying to help them, and it really did help a lot of them. It gave me some clarity moving forward, going, I really like and love these people, but also I don't want to be in a situation where I needed to fight for policy.
Right.
In an organization that wasn't even technically the organization I worked for. It just kind of put me in a weird spot.
Right.
And around the same time, too, was when Steve Shadrack was saying, "Hey, brother, I think you're the guy to help us with leading these boot camps and build the SRS for the next several years." So, a lot of things kind of happened all at once. I will tell you, though, a lot informed me in that process. Yeah. And I still have several great relationships, and there's not like this ongoing bitterness that I'm aware of or anything else, And in fact, recently I got a message from somebody that said, "Hey, thank you so much for, kind of lifting the weights that you've lifted. I'm fully funded. My family is thriving, and I've not lost the fact that's because you took the time to invest in me and in us." And so, pretty healthy all around. Not easy, and I'm really thankful that it was a process that allowed me to go, okay, what is it I need to be doing versus what do I want to be doing versus what really needs to be done. And really, there were a few different discussions, and so I hope that the listeners will hear that it's a process.
Yeah.
It's and if for whatever reason God has you listening to this podcast in this moment, in this time, and you're sitting here and you haven't turned it off yet, and you're still processing, well, my organization needs to change. We just want to encourage you with a few different ideas. So let's popcorn back and forth with that, Megan. One is, I would say, be respectful.
Yes.
Do not be the know-it-all that you got your money set, so it's your job to tell everybody what to do, because that's not going to win you friends at all.
No, it won't. So that's definitely huge. I also think something that is really huge is prayer. I do remember spending a lot of time praying for our organizational leaders to see what needed to happen and transpire. And so definitely prayer is a huge thing. Prayer every day, all the time is important. I think the Bible says something about that.
It's in there.
So, yes, I definitely think prayer is huge.
Pray without ceasing comes to mind, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think another one would be, in an appropriate way, really get a feel for what it is you're talking about before you move forward. You don't want to appear as if you're gathering grumblers and bringing a list of demands. Right. And yet it is good for you to know, hey, I know just because of conversations, Bill's not fully funded, Keisha's not fully funded, Larry's not fully funded, Antoine's not fully funded. Yeah. Wouldn't we be better as an organization if we were all fully funded? That's a very fair question to ask a president or some other sort of supervisor that is open-ended It's very different from, you realize it's your fault that Billy and Keisha and Antoine and they're not fully funded. You're really kind of a lousy president, sir. That's not really the way to start.
Yeah, no, definitely not. That's really aggressive and emotional.
Aggressive. Yeah.
I also think you have to be able to identify the steps that it's going to take to get where you want to go.
Yes.
Or where you see that the organization needs to eventually end.
Good.
And so start with the things that need to happen first.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, it was having a coach. It was hiring somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really crucial.
Yeah.
And,
Hiring somebody might be the case, and maybe that's too soon. Maybe it's something like, ask your president if he will read the God Ask.
Yes.
And just say, this book has impacted me, or something like that. Mm-hmm. It could actually be Scott Morton's Blind Spots.
Yes.
But ask them, say, hey, this is a problem. And if they're at the point where they agree that it's a problem, be like, would you do this? Would you read this book? Mm-hmm. For the month of, we'll say, June.
Yeah.
And can we sit down together on July 1st and tell me what that's doing? Would you be willing, you're the president, you're the boss, not me, but would you be willing to share with me, what are your thoughts? That person, if you're president, if she's reading through that book and she comes back to you at the end of the month and goes, I disagree. Well, you know where you stand.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Or the flip side, if they're like, this was incredible, how do we do this? Thank you for bringing this to me. Could you help me? Well, that's a completely different posture. So,
right.
What are some other things? Okay, we said reading a book. We said having conversations. I know you did something with some of the leadership in your organization. You brought them to somewhere, right?
Yes. So we took some of our leaders to a Support Raising Leaders conference, which is for people who are in organizations that raise support. And it's an amazing event, amazing conference to go to.
And that is put on by Support Raising Solutions. And so I'm not here to toot our horn on that. One of the reasons it's so amazing, though, is we don't make it about us.
Yes.
And so you'll see SRS branding, and I'm usually emceeing because I talk a lot. But the point is, we have all sorts of different ministry leaders from lots of different organizations, and there is something about when someone from a Bible translation organization stands up and their leader says, this has changed us. And then someone from a campus ministry organization stands up and says, this has changed us.
Yes.
All of a sudden, it's not just SRS is trying to sell us another book. But it's more of no, they're messing with our culture because they want us to be successful at the Great Commission. Okay. Yes. And so that is a great, and it is designed that way where we want in fact, we're adding an executive track even more so at our next one, because we realize there are people who train and coach support raising, but also executive leadership that needs to really wrestle with some of these in a core way. And oftentimes they want to have those conversations with other executives.
Yes.
They don't want to have it all the time with the coaches, right?
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So, okay, great. I think we're probably reaching towards the end of this particular podcast. So you're working in a ministry, you want to do the ministry that you're called to do, but you're realizing there's a support raising culture change that needs to happen. I think we've had a lot of really good ideas, and this isn't a tutorial, but hopefully we've given people something to think about, something to apply. Any final thoughts, Meg, before we wrap up this podcast today, as far as how you would encourage somebody to move forward in prayer and taking steps?
Yeah, if you are somebody that is not necessarily a major decision maker in your organization and you're working full-time in ministry, but you're seeing this need, man, if anything, definitely pray and then hand the God Ask to whoever in your organization makes decisions. I think that is huge. And if you begin to be somebody who's a change agent within your organization, then make sure you have permission by whoever is above you that you can carve out some time to help with that.
Yeah. I'll just echo what you say, but I'll double down on the time thing. Be careful.
Yes.
You really are no good to anybody if you're working 100 hours a week.
That's true.
So you have to figure out where can you give, and yeah, I'll just echo what you said. You need to have some sort of supervisory permission.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're gonna be terrible at everything.
That's right.
So anyway, well, Meg, as always, it's a pleasure to interact with you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and thoughts and insight and experiences as far as being a change agent when you have another job in the ministry. I really appreciate you joining us today on the SRS Podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisersolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.